Hey there everyone. So, recently I've been receiving a lot of requests to respond to a video which was put up by a user named Turd Flinging Monkey titled The Problem with Propertarianism, which served as an attempted criticism of an anarchist society and a propertarian government. The fact that these two things were conflated under the same criticism should hint at why I refer to this as an attempted criticism rather than simply a critique. In short, Turd Flinging Monkey has absolutely no idea what he's talking about. He basically just found some random archive article on a blog website written by Frank Van Dunn, a legal theorist who advocates for a system of polycentric arbitration that has vaguely Hoppian leanings, and assumed that propertarianism, critarchy, and anarchy were all somehow linked. Now, the article in question, which Turd Flinging Monkey references, has nothing to do with anarchism. In fact, the article he cited specifically argues that a government would need to exist in order to have any form of polycentric law. In fact, the only reason he associates this with anarchy is because the title of the website, voluntarist.com. No, I'm dead serious. That's actually his connection between these three radically different concepts.
What? You've never heard about critarchy? Well, that's because it doesn't go by the name critarchy. It goes by names like propertarianism and even anarcho-capitalism and voluntarism. So what is critarchy? It's ruled by judges. So if we look at a website called voluntarist.com, there's an appendix saying what is critarchy. They will admit, if you get down to it, that they are a critarchy.
Isn't that cute? But it's wrong!
So, he found an editorial piece archived on some blog website from an author who is not even a voluntarist, arguing for a system which no voluntarists advocate for or ever have advocated for, on a website which doesn't even exclusively host voluntarist content, and that's what all voluntarists everywhere anytime in history have argued their society would be like. GG Eincraps, how will you ever recover? But anyway, for those who don't know, a polycentric legal system is the idea that a state should attempt to create competition within arbitration by establishing multiple arbiters per district which are able to create their own legal systems, and this is not what voluntarists advocate for. I have a whole video going in depth about the concept of what anarchist arbitration would be like, along with the issues of arbitration in a state society. Link will be located in the description. The problem with the polycentric system, even in theory, should be apparent right off the bat. Because each legal system is set up by the state or has to have approval from the state in order to function, these quote-unquote independent arbiters would basically just be the current judicial system, except they pretend to be different from one another. They'd all be de facto owned by the state, they'd all be funded by and would have to have a license in order to operate, which all ultimately means that they aren't really independent, because they all operate for the exact same incentives and for the exact same organization which owns and organizes them. On top of this, you're forced to associate with the arbiters recognized by the state if you wanted to have a dispute, and this completely defeats the purpose of the main argument for polycentric law, which is that there's competition between the arbiters, which would give them the incentive to economize to be more efficient and create more accountability for the arbiters' rulings. If you're taxed to pay the arbiters, and you can only associate with the arbiters the state approves of in order to have disputes, how the fuck is this any different than the current system? My point is that voluntarism and propertarianism have nothing in common with one another, but I'll have to reserve a full critique of propertarianism for another video. Now, Filthy created a great response to Turd Flinging Monkey's original video while I was finishing up with my last, so if you want to see a detailed voluntarist response to Turd Flinging Monkey's video on critarchy, I'll go ahead and link Filthy's video in the description. Filthy's response was so great that I don't really have much to respond to the original video with that Filthy didn't already cover in his response. So why am I making this video? Well, TFM responded again, and it's shit. How shit is it? Well, you'll see.
So the main criticism I got was from people who believe in these systems like anarcho-capitalism, voluntarism, or proprietarianism, who basically, because they don't advocate for X, and I'm telling them that it will result in X, that I simply don't understand the system, I'm being disingenuous, I'm being stupid, all kinds of stuff like that.
We're a little over 30 seconds in, and we're already presented with our first straw man argument, one which is echoed by the title of his video. No, the main argument from voluntarists who were criticizing your initial video was not a confusion between stated preference and revealed preference. The main criticism was that you don't understand what voluntarism is, and despite that fact you made a video attempting to argue against stateless arbitration based on an article which didn't have anything to do with what voluntarists argue, let alone how voluntarists think arbitration without a state would work. And since your entire argument for how you claimed arbitration in a stateless society would really play out is based on a misrepresentation of what voluntarists argue, it really doesn't even matter if the most common argument anarchists made against you was to explain what they actually believe in, because you didn't accurately represent what they believe in to begin with. And for that matter, your initial argument wasn't that voluntarism advocates for a different legal system that would inevitably result in a critarchy. Your argument was explicitly that critarchy is what voluntarists advocate for.
What? You've never heard about critarchy? Well, that's because it doesn't go by the name critarchy. It goes by names like proprietarianism and even anarcho-capitalism and voluntarism. How can you have an anarchist system or a voluntary system that's ruled by judges? They will admit, if you get down to it, that they are a critarchy.
It would be one thing if you just made an incredibly ignorant video talking about a subject you don't know the first thing about, but to lie about what your initial argument even was in an attempt to backtrack and try and shift the goalpost instead of simply conceding that you were wrong and that you misrepresented what you were arguing against is incredibly shady, and you're seriously attempting to present the people who are saying that you're being disingenuous as irrational while actively lying to your audience. But assuming that your original argument actually was that ultimately a stateless society would result in a rule-by-judges system, as opposed to anarchists actually advocating for rule-by-judges, your entire explanation on how this would happen would have to be based on a misrepresentation. So the fundamental premise of your original video is flawed. So how do voluntarists actually view arbitration? Well, get ready for this, guys, because I don't know if you can handle it. Disputes should happen between the people who are actually involved in a crime and the person who is victimized by that crime on a mutually agreed upon forum. That's it. Like with every other aspect of the state, the fundamental issue, specifically with how arbitration functions in a stateless society, is that the state uses coercive force to establish a monopoly on arbitration, more conventionally referred to as a rule of law. And it has nothing to do with settling disputes, as shown by the fact that nearly half of all people imprisoned in the United States alone haven't actually victimized another person. Gee, turns out when a fundamentally parasitic coercive organization uses force so that it's the only arbiter able to legally handle disputes in the society in question, arbitration tends to start being more about collecting revenue for its owners, establishing further control over the society, since at this point it can just make up whatever rulings it wants regardless of whether or not they're demonstrably justified, and cartelizing the other industries around itself by outlawing competition or making competition nearly impossible, as to make it impossible to avoid associating with it, rather than victim compensation at the expense of the criminal parties. Who would have thought? A state fundamentally is inseparable from the concept of a monopoly on arbitration because a state, in order to exist, has to be able to use coercion in order to collect revenue for itself. And in order to do this on a systemic level, there cannot be independent arbiters. So, Turd Flinging Monkey, if you want another chance to actually make an argument against stateless arbitration, this is the fundamental premise of the anarchist argument for arbitration without a state, and why it's more desirable than a statist rule of law. And just a heads up, if you actually do plan on responding, I would suggest you watch my video expanding upon this concept in greater detail and the practical side of stateless arbitration. Because if your initial reaction upon hearing this and the arguments you plan on making are anything along the lines of who enforces the system or why would criminals choose to do this, yeah, I go over those points in that video, so don't embarrass yourself again, because you don't have to.